I'm Cassandra Monroe, 34 years old, and just 3 hours ago, I became the sole owner of my family's multi-million-dollar industrial empire. Still freelancing from your living room? My father, Douglas Monroe, scoffed across the Thanksgiving table, his eyes lingering disapprovingly on my sweater and jeans. I simply smiled, feeling my phone vibrate quietly in my pocket. I glanced down and read the alert, "Acquisition of Monroe Industries complete. You now own 100% of your family's company." When I looked back up at my father's smug expression, I didn't say a word, just smiled a little wider. He had no idea what was coming. Before I explain how the so-called family failure wound up owning everything they spent their lives protecting, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe if you've ever been told you're not good enough by the very people who should have supported you most. Growing up a Monroe in Charleston, South Carolina, meant living under the weight of tradition, power, and perfection. Our home was a massive antebellum estate just outside the city, surrounded by live oaks and heavy expectation. Monroe Industries, founded in 1951, wasn't just a company, it was our legacy, our identity, and our burden. My grandfather, Howard Monroe, had started it with a few rusty machines and a vision. By the time I was born, it had grown into one of the Southeast's leading manufacturing giants. His oil portrait dominated the grand hallway, eyes stern and judgmental, like he was always watching. My father, Douglas, inherited the company when I was still in pigtails. He expanded it ruthlessly, barking orders at boardrooms and family dinners alike. Everything in our house, every conversation, every schedule revolved around the business. Business is war, Cassandra. "The Monroes don't ask, they take," he'd proclaim, slapping the polished oak dining table for effect. My mother, Vivian, played her role flawlessly, the graceful hostess ever composed. Her job wasn't at the company, but by Douglas's side, organizing fundraisers, perfecting every dinner party, and never once challenging his authority. She'd whisper advice like, "Wear navy for credibility, and remember to smile," but never laugh too loud. A Monroe woman represents the brand she'd remind me if I dared to show up in sneakers. And then there was Jackson, my older brother, Ivy League golden boy, and the heir apparent. Captain of the debate team, fluent in 3 languages, and practically raised at the boardroom table. By the time Jackson turned 22, he had a corner office at Monroe Industries' Charleston headquarters, complete with his own assistant and company credit line. The succession plan was practically engraved in stone. "Jackson understands legacy," my father would declare to board members and dinner guests, while I sat silently at the same table, invisible, in my own home. My sister Isabel followed the pre-approved path. She majored in economics at Vanderbilt, married the son of one of my father's country club partners, and now floats between charity boards and hosting luncheons for Monroe Industries donor circles. "Why do you always have to be so difficult?" she'd murmur at family events, genuinely baffled by my resistance to fall in line. But I was the outlier, the one piece of the puzzle that didn't fit, no matter how tightly they tried to press me into place. Even as a kid, I questioned everything. Why did our factories run outdated, waste-heavy equipment? Why weren't we investing in clean tech like our competitors? Why did no one in management know the names of our factory floor workers? Each question earned me a dismissive smirk or cold silence. "That's not how industry works, Cassandra," my father would mutter. End of discussion. At 14, I started a side business repairing tablets and laptops in our neighborhood. I reinvested my profits, bought tools, and even hired 2 classmates to help. At dinner, I proudly shared how I made more that month than the summer intern at Monroe Industries. My father chuckled. "That's sweet." But real business happens in boardrooms, not garages, he said, turning back to Jackson to discuss a recent warehouse acquisition. My mother patted my wrist like I was a pet in need of calming. "Not everyone's built for the corporate world, darling." Her words weren't cruel, they were worse. They were condescending in the way only the well-meaning can be. They believed lowering expectations was kindness. At 16, I designed a scheduling system that could have reduced bottlenecks in one of our regional plants. I spent weeks refining projections, formatting spreadsheets, and crafting a full implementation plan. My father allowed me to present it at dinner. This plan could reduce downtime by 20% and save nearly $500,000 annually, I said, my voice trembling with hope. He skimmed the top page, then dropped it beside his plate. Cute theory. Let's leave logistics to professionals. 2 years later, Jackson pitched nearly the same model. It was implemented within a month. My father called it visionary. By my senior year, the pattern was clear. In the Monroe family, your value was your alignment with Monroe Industries. And to them, I was a liability, the misfit, the dreamer, the embarrassment. But I had already begun crafting my own escape plan, and this time they wouldn't see it coming. The college application process became my first true act of rebellion. In the Monroe family, the path was carved in stone: undergrad at Wharton, then an MBA from Harvard. My father already had alumni phone calls lined up and preliminary donations sent. Everything was orchestrated before I even finished junior year. Business administration is in your blood, he'd say. Even if you don't take the reins, you need to understand how our world works. Instead, I applied to Stanford for computer science. The night I told them over dinner is burned into my memory. My father's face turned an alarming shade of red. Computer science, he choked out. What exactly do you plan to do with that fix broken routers? Technology is the future of manufacturing, I said calmly. Automation efficiency, clean production, it's all connected. Sustainability, he muttered like a curse word. Another fantasy pushed by people who've never run payroll or faced a shareholders meeting. Across the table, Jackson smirked. Let her have her fun, Dad. She was never going to be part of the real business anyway. My mother, ever trying to mediate, chimed in gently. Douglas, maybe Cassandra could bring fresh ideas to the IT department. Someday. That was the closest thing to encouragement I'd ever received, framed, of course, within the assumption I'd eventually fold into Monroe Industries. I left Charleston for Palo Alto with my father's parting words following me like a ghost. When this tech phase ends, you'll have a place at Monroe. Not anything vital, of course, but something appropriate. Stanford was like oxygen after years of suffocation. Surrounded by minds who valued change over tradition, who saw questions as the spark of progress, I flourished. For the first time in my life, people wanted to hear my ideas. I met Jasmine Lee during orientation. She became the sister I'd always needed, a friend who didn't just nod when I talked tech, but lit up with excitement. You get both sides, she'd say. Business and engineering. You don't just translate between them, you fuse them. By sophomore year, I landed an internship with ClearPath Systems, a startup designing AI-powered optimization tools for manufacturing plants. My boss, Diana Ramirez, became the mentor I never knew I was missing. She encouraged every challenge I raised, every theory I tested. Keep asking why, she told me. The second you accept, that's just how we do it, you've stopped building something better. I returned to ClearPath every summer, soaking up everything about sustainable practices, process, intelligence, and disruptive innovation. I wasn't just building a resume, I was building a future that no one back home saw coming. I watched as ClearPath Systems transformed outdated manufacturing operations into lean, environmentally responsible facilities without sacrificing profit. Everything I had tried to tell my family for years, it was not only possible, it was thriving, and I was helping make it happen. Meanwhile, holidays in Charleston grew increasingly tense. Each visit began with subtle jabs about my Silicon Valley phase and ended with dinner table silence after I declined another invitation to join Monroe Industries. During Christmas, my junior year, my father raised a glass. To Jackson, who sealed the Langford account this quarter, our largest to date, he announced proudly. And to Isabel, whose charity gala raised $2, $3 million, with half the donors being Monroe partners. The Monroe legacy lives on. I sat there, entirely unacknowledged. Never mind that I was graduating early with honors and already fielding offers from major innovation firms. I was invisible still. After graduation, I received an email from Monroe Industries. They offered me a junior analyst position in their IT department, reporting to a man who still used a BlackBerry and printed every email. The pay was a fraction of what Jackson had earned, straight out of undergrad. It's a chance to prove yourself. my father said as if he were bestowing a gift. You can't expect to start at the top just because you're a Monroe. I declined. And instead, I said yes to NovaForge Technologies in Boston, an up-and-coming company applying AI and sustainable systems to reimagine industrial supply chains. My first apartment was a studio near the Seaport District, small enough to fit inside the sunroom of our Charleston estate. But it was mine. When my mother visited, my father never did. She looked around the minimalist space with a grimace. "Darling, there's no reason to live like this," she said gently. "Come home, work for the company. We'll put you in a proper place. A condo, at least." "I'm building my own path, Mom," I replied. "I need this. I want this." She sighed, brushing her hand over the chipped countertop. "I just hope this rebellion doesn't last much longer. You're missing your birthright." But what she couldn't see, what they all missed, was that I had found my true inheritance. My abilities, my autonomy, and a career unshaped by their limitations. At NovaForge, I thrived. Within 2 years, I was leading a development team pioneering software that reduced manufacturing waste by 40%. My salary tripled. Industry leaders respected me, not for my family name, but for my results. Back home, though, I was still the outsider. Holiday dinners became performance pieces where I bit my tongue as they clung to outdated strategies, oblivious to the future that was already passing them by. And when I offered insights, "That's cute," my father would say, "but it's not real industry work." My father would wave off any of my achievements with the same condescending line, "But Monroe Industries is real business, real factories, real products." By the time I turned 27, I had become Director of Sustainable Innovation at NovaForge Technologies with multiple patents to my name and a growing presence in the industrial tech sector. But I wasn't content. I had a vision, a bold one. What if I could bridge the divide between traditional manufacturing and emerging technologies? What if companies didn't have to choose between sustainability and profitability? The final nudge came at Easter dinner. My father launched into yet another tirade about flash-in-the-pan tech startups, while Jackson nodded along like his father's echo. That night, I stayed up outlining the framework for what would become Virion Systems. It was time to build something of my own. I'd saved diligently, but launching a tech manufacturing hybrid required capital. Thankfully, I had one unexpected ally, my grandmother Margaret Monroe, who had left me a $250,000 inheritance when she passed. She was the only one who had ever encouraged my independence. A firebrand in her youth, she once whispered to me at age 16, "You remind me of who I was before I learned to stay quiet." Don't make my mistake. I honored her by putting every cent into my vision. I moved into a microloft outside Cambridge and turned my one-room apartment into my headquarters. My desk doubled as my dining table. My bed doubled as my thinking couch. I worked 18 hours a day developing the platform, networking, cold pitching, and coding through the night. When word reached Charleston, the Monroe family's reaction was swift and predictable. Cassandra's playing entrepreneur, now Jackson announced at Thanksgiving with theatrical amusement. "How charming," my father said. "So tell us, what is it your little company actually does?" I explained, "We're building integrated systems that help traditional factories transition to smart, sustainable operations, improving output while lowering waste and energy costs." Jackson grinned. "So, like fancy spreadsheets for old plants?" I smiled tightly. "Our first install boosted production at Walton Precision by 32% and cut their emissions by 28%. My father waved a dismissive hand. "Walton's a small-time outfit. Try running something like that at Monroe's scale. It's a fantasy. I'd be happy to submit a proposal," I started. "Monroe Industries doesn't need saving." He cut me off. "We've thrived 3 generations doing things our way." The early days were brutal. Every success came with 10 rejections. Regulations changed overnight. Markets crashed. Servers broke. I failed more times than I could count. But failure didn't scare me. What terrified me was staying small to make them comfortable. I maxed out my credit cards, skipped more meals than I care to admit, and once had to choose between paying rent and making payroll for my first 2 hires. I chose payroll and spent 3 weeks sleeping on a futon in the corner of my office. 6 months and Daniel Hayes came on board as my operations director and business partner. We'd worked together at Nova Forge, and he understood the mission. He took a 70% pay cut to join Virion Systems, working mostly for equity and blind faith. The way you merge environmental sustainability with real-world business solutions, it's revolutionary, he told me. Legacy manufacturing is racing toward a cliff. You're not just shouting a warning, you're building the bridge. They just didn't know they needed it yet. One by one, we built a team of true believers. Jason Reed, a coding prodigy who translated complex industrial processes into streamlined, scalable platforms. Sophia Martinez, a chemical engineer with a talent for real-world systems optimization. Kyle Bennett, a marketing strategist who knew exactly how to speak to old-school execs without alienating them. Our first major win came 18 months in. Brighton Steel was teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. After we implemented our resource management system, they cut operational waste by 37% and turned their first profit in 2 years. Their CEO became our loudest advocate. Suddenly, the doors that were once slammed in our faces began to creak open. But back in Charleston, my family barely blinked. "How's your app business?" my father would ask, voice dripping with sarcasm. If I mentioned new contracts, Jackson would one-up me with Monroe Industries' latest acquisition. If I shared sustainability metrics, my father would counter with quarterly profit margins. If I explained our newest efficiency models, my mother would steer the conversation back to Isabel's charity events. The most crushing moment came after we landed $1 million contract with Westport Manufacturing, one of Monroe Industries' key competitors. Instead of congratulations, I got accusations. "So now you're helping the enemy?" My father said, his voice low and cold. "This your revenge for not getting an executive seat at Monroe?" "This has nothing to do with revenge," I said. "Westport was willing to innovate. You, me?" What he snapped. Still running a multi-generational business that feeds thousands of families. Oh, and your little experiment is handing our competition a tactical edge. How do you think that makes you look to this family I left that night before dessert, swallowing tears and fury? Back at my real office, one with a staff of vision and results, I dove back into our expansion plans. "You know what the real problem is," Daniel said as we ran numbers late into the night. "Your family lives inside a box. You're designing the blueprint for what comes next." Daniel was right. The very perspective my family had long viewed as a flaw, being the outsider, the challenger, turned out to be my greatest strength. I spoke both languages, traditional manufacturing and emerging technology. I didn't just understand them, I knew how to merge them. And over the next 2 years, Virion Systems exploded in growth. We expanded beyond software into hardware integration. We developed proprietary processes using sustainable materials and built an elite client base of manufacturers eager to modernize without sacrificing profit. The ones ready for change found us and stayed. We secured a major Series B funding round, led by investors who weren't just looking for returns, they wanted impact. Within 18 months, our valuation surged from $50 million to $150 million. We moved out of our tiny office space and into a sleek headquarters in Cambridge's Innovation District. Our team grew past 60, then over 100 engineers, analysts, supply chain strategists, marketing specialists. Yet back in Charleston, my family's attitude barely budged. When I was featured in Modern Industry Leaders magazine, my father gave it a glance and muttered, "Nice bit of press. We'll see if you're still around in 5 years." Jackson, true to form, was more pointed. Anyone can look good during a boom when they're spending other people's money. Try surviving a downturn without training wheels. What they didn't know, and what I was already hearing in quiet conversations with industry peers, was that Monroe Industries was faltering. Their refusal to evolve was finally becoming a liability in a market shifting towards sustainability and digitization. 3 years into Virion's journey, Monroe's earnings showed a 15% year-over-year decline. Not fatal, but a first crack in their polished facade. At our next family dinner, my father brushed it off as market jitters, but I noticed the extra scotch he poured. Jackson didn't gloat that night. Even Isabel's husband, Mark, A managing director at Crestline Capital who worked in private equity kept checking his phone under the table. Industry analysts were calling out Monroe Industries' failure to adapt as a looming threat. Meanwhile, companies using our tech were not only complying with new regulations, they were thriving. It felt surreal. I'd spent so long proving I didn't need Monroe Industries, now they were becoming the cautionary tale. Still, I did something unexpected. I tried to help. "Dad," I said one evening in his study, "I've been tracking Monroe's position. Virion could help. We've built systems tailored for companies like yours." He didn't even look up. "We don't need charity, Cassandra," he said, waving me off. "We've lasted 3 generations doing things our way." "Cassandra," my father said, his voice clipped with formality, "I'm glad your little company is doing well in its niche. But Monroe Industries doesn't need saving. We've survived market shifts for nearly a century. This isn't just a shift." "Dad," I said gently but firmly, "the entire industry is changing. Sustainability isn't a fringe concern anymore. It's essential to economic survival. Our systems can cut your production costs by over 30% while bringing Monroe into compliance with the new environmental regulations before penalties begin." His jaw clenched. "So now you're an expert on my business, the business you walked away from, the one you've never spent a single day actually running." "I'm not claiming to be an expert on Monroe specifically," I said, choosing my words with care. "But I am an expert in sustainable manufacturing and tech-driven transformation. We've helped dozens of companies transition smaller companies," he cut in. "Different companies. Not a legacy operation like Monroe." He rose from his chair, a silent dismissal. "When you've run a business longer than 5 minutes, maybe, I'll consider your advice. Until then, focus on your startup and leave Monroe to those who understand it." I left his study with a mix of frustration, sadness, and an unsettling sense of foreboding. I hadn't come to gloat or impose, I had come to help. But his pride couldn't make room for that. Back in Cambridge, Virion Systems only continued to grow. We secured a major investment round from Greenfield Ventures, a top-tier firm focused on sustainable innovation. Our valuation climbed to 500 million. We opened offices in Berlin, and Singapore began consulting globally and picked up awards for industry impact and innovation. Then one afternoon, I got an unexpected message from Richard Palmer, a long-serving board member at Monroe Industries. We met for lunch far from Charleston, far from watchful eyes. He didn't mince words. "Your father won't admit it, Cassandra, but Monroe is in trouble. They've taken on large debt to prop up appearances. 3 major clients are considering pulling out. And the new Michigan facility, bleeding money due to outdated systems." I stared at him. "Why are you telling me this?" Richard met my eyes. "Because you may be the only one who both understands what needs to be done and still cares about the Monroe legacy. Douglas and Jackson are too deep in denial." "I've offered to help," I said. "They weren't interested. They might not have a choice soon," he replied grimly. "There's talk of seeking outside investors or selling if things don't turn around in the next 2 quarters. The words hit me harder than I expected. Despite everything, it still felt like home. Monroe Industries was still my family's legacy, my grandfather's life's work, the foundation of our name, our wealth, and our standing in Charleston. The idea of it collapsing, or worse, being bought out by a faceless conglomerate eager to strip it for parts, filled me with a quiet ache I couldn't ignore. At my mother's birthday dinner, the cracks were more visible than ever. My father looked older. His once commanding posture slouched the creases in his face deeper. Jackson was drinking too much, nursing his bourbon like it was a shield. The arrogance he used to wear like a badge had worn thin, replaced by clipped remarks and darting eyes. Even Isabel seemed quieter, more cautious with her words. During dinner, I tried again. "I've been following the latest compliance mandates coming out of D.C., I said gently, cutting through the awkward silence. "They're putting pressure on legacy manufacturers." Jackson sighed audibly. "Here we go." I kept going. But there are ways to turn that pressure into profit, real opportunities for modernization and growth. My father's hand tightened around his fork. "Cassandra," he said, voice cool. Not everyone is willing to sacrifice profit for trendy environmental ideals. That's just it, I pressed. These aren't trade-offs. Our solutions at Virion have improved efficiency and margins across the board. Compliance doesn't mean compromise anymore. He narrowed his eyes. So, this is another pitch you're prospecting over dinner now? The accusation stung. No, I said, struggling to keep my voice even. I'm trying to help. Monroe Industries is still home, despite everything. I don't want to see it fail. Jackson jumped in. Who says we're failing? We just closed the Delaney deal. I knew the deal. Everyone in the sector did. It was a fraction of what Monroe had projected and gave Delaney leverage on pricing and delivery schedules. I'm glad to hear that I said carefully. But if you ever want to talk about how Virion's systems could support Monroe's turnaround, I'm available. My father set his fork down with finality. We'll be sure to reach out if we need advice from someone who walked away from this company. 2 weeks later, Richard Palmer called again. They're looking for buyers, Cassandra. Quietly, but actively. Your father would rather hand it to a stranger than admit it needs transformation. That night, I sat in my apartment poring over Monroe's public filings and private notes I'd compiled over the years. The company could be saved. It still had value facilities, long-term clients, and a legacy worth preserving. A wild idea began to take shape. Daring, maybe even reckless, but right. What if Virion Systems acquired Monroe Industries? They could never know it was me. Not yet. I knew I couldn't make a direct offer. If my family caught even a hint that I was behind it, they'd reject the deal on principle. So I began working through intermediaries, trusted advisors, attorneys, and a newly formed holding company to conceal Virion Systems' involvement until the acquisition was complete. It wasn't just about business anymore. This was my vision. Realize sustainable tech-integrated manufacturing, proving not only that I was right, but that ignoring progress came at a cost. Saving Monroe Industries and preserving jobs while redefining its future? It was a full-circle moment. But the ethical weight wasn't lost on me. Was this really about helping them? Or proving myself? Was I trying to honor my grandfather's legacy or prove my father wrong? I spent nights pacing my apartment, debating. After several long conversations with Daniel and our executive team, I came to peace with my motives. The truth was, Monroe Industries was a smart acquisition for Virion, even without the emotional ties. That didn't make my reasons less valid. With the decision made, I threw myself into the most audacious move of my career. By the time I turned 34, 5 years after founding, Virion, our systems, had become an international force. What began as a small startup with 2 employees and borrowed office space now spanned 3 continents and employed more than 300 people. Our software and hardware solutions were reshaping how factories operated. We helped partners cut millions of tons in industrial waste annually while simultaneously boosting profit margins. Clients once considered too massive to reach were now part of our growing portfolio. We modernized old equipment instead of replacing it, saving companies millions while reducing environmental impact. Our consulting arm became a beacon for companies navigating complex sustainability regulations. We weren't just helping them survive the new economy, we were helping them lead it. And along the way, my life changed too. Gone were the nights of sleeping under my desk. I now lived in a sunlit condo near the Charles River, still modest but comfortable. I was regularly invited to keynote conferences, profiled in Industry Forward, and even approached to write a book on manufacturing innovation. What my family once labeled failure had become a force reshaping the field. We paid every employee a living wage from custodial staff to C-suite. We refused to partner with clients who treated sustainability as a PR stunt. At a global summit in Singapore, Anthony Blake, CEO of a longtime rival, pulled me aside after a panel. He grinned and said, "You know what? Makes Cassandra Monroe dangerous. She actually believes in all this sustainability stuff. She's not chasing trends, she's building them. And the rest of us, we're trying to keep up." If you've ever dared to rewrite your own legacy, don't forget to subscribe, because the next part of Cassandra's journey is one you won't want to miss. I took Anthony Blake's words as the compliment they were meant to be. And while Virion Systems soared, the updates about Monroe Industries grew more troubling with each passing month. Their stock had plummeted nearly 40% over the last 18 months. One of their core plants in Alabama had shut down, resulting in the layoff of over 300 employees. Longtime clients were switching to competitors, offering smarter, greener solutions, many powered by tech we'd pioneered. Richard Palmer kept me informed from inside the storm. They've hired 3 different consulting firms, he told me, but your father shoots down any proposal that suggests meaningful change. And Jackson, he's slashing budgets like it's 1990. They're bleeding from every direction. Then came the news I'd anticipated and dreaded. Monroe Industries was officially for sale, not on the open market, of course. They were trying to keep it quiet to avoid a further stock slide, but they had retained Hamilton Mergers and Acquisitions to quietly field offers. The timing couldn't have been more aligned. Virion had just closed a Series D funding round, giving us more capital than we'd ever had. We were already scouting for acquisitions to expand our hardware capabilities. From a business standpoint, Monroe Industries still held immense value, long-term contracts, deep-rooted relationships, and physical infrastructure that could support our next phase. I called an emergency meeting with Daniel and the leadership team. Acquiring Monroe could fast-track our hardware roadmap by at least 3 years, Daniel said, reviewing the numbers. Their scale, plus our tech, that's a market-shifting move. Sophia Martinez, now our CTO, nodded. Their factories are behind, but the bones are good. With Virion systems layered in, we could transform operations within the first quarter. Kyle Bennett, our marketing director, added, and the Monroe name still carries weight in traditional sectors. For the legacy manufacturers, we've been trying to crack this could be our key. Then Jason Reed, our lead engineer, cut to the core. This is your family's company, Cassandra. Are you sure you can separate strategy from sentiment? It was the question I'd wrestled with for weeks. I believe I can, I said. But we need to handle this differently. I laid out the plan. Create a holding company to shield Virion's identity. Route the offer through Hamilton. No mention of me, not until the deal was closed. Won't they find out eventually? Daniel asked. They will, I said. But by then the offer will have stood on merit alone, not emotion. Sophia tilted her head. And ethically, I'm not hiding the truth, I said. I'm delaying it until the facts speak louder than the family name. Not the acquisition itself, Sophia said thoughtfully. That makes strategic sense. But hiding your involvement, that's the part I'm still unsure about. It was a fair concern, one I'd agonized over more times than I could count. In a typical deal, no, it wouldn't be appropriate, I replied. But this isn't typical. If Monroe Industries saw my name on the offer, they'd reject it without even reading. I'm not doing this to deceive them. I'm trying to give the proposal a fair shot. After hours of deliberation, the leadership team agreed. Virion Systems would pursue the acquisition through a neutral entity, a holding company we named Horizon Ventures, staffed with trusted representatives who understood the delicacy of the operation. We secured additional funding to make a strong offer and outlined integration plans down to the hour, merging Monroe's aging operations with our smart systems, preserving jobs, and revitalizing the brand. Hamilton M&A informed us that other buyers were circling, mostly private equity groups known for carving up companies and offloading the scraps. Our offer wasn't the biggest in cash terms, but it was built on preservation jobs, legacy reputation. That appealed to several board members, especially those like Richard Palmer, who quietly relayed insights back to me. He didn't breach confidentiality, but he believed in what we were doing. 3 months of tense negotiations followed. There were sleepless nights, competing bids, surprise clauses, and financial hoops that tested even our seasoned team. And all the while, I was expected to smile through holiday calls and family check-ins like nothing was happening. Thanksgiving loomed, our annual Monroe family gathering in Charleston. The timing was surreal. If everything held together, the deal would close on Thanksgiving morning, mere hours before I'd sit across from the people who had spent years dismissing my vision. The day before Thanksgiving, I got the call from our legal team. The board has approved the final terms, said Daniel, his voice tight with adrenaline. Tomorrow morning, the paperwork's signed. By noon, Virion Systems will own Monroe Industries. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling of my Cambridge condo. Was I doing this to save something? Or to prove something? Would this mend what had been broken or break it further. Despite my emotional uncertainty, the business case was airtight. We weren't tearing anything down. We were building something new, something better. And this time, I wasn't asking for permission. I was reclaiming the legacy in my own way. As dawn broke over Cambridge on Thanksgiving Day, I dressed deliberately. Soft, navy blue, understated heels, hair tied back in a loose knot. Today wasn't about power plays or bravado. It was about quiet transformation. My phone buzzed steadily with legal updates as signatures rolled in and funds moved across accounts. At exactly 11:47 a.m., the message I had been waiting for arrived. Acquisition complete. Congratulations. Monroe Industries, the company that had defined my family's identity, rejected my ideas, and belittled my ambitions, now belonged to Virion Systems. To me. I drove south to Charleston, a strange calm settling over me with each passing mile. There was no undoing this. The decisions made over the past 6 months were permanent. And now, whatever happened across that Thanksgiving table could either begin a reconciliation or solidify the rift. I pulled into the driveway of the Monroe estate right at 2 p.m., the exact start time of our holiday tradition. The Greek Revival mansion with its wraparound porch and towering columns looked exactly as it always had. But I didn't. This time, I wasn't the outsider. My mother greeted me at the door with her usual well-practiced grace, brushing my cheek with a cool air kiss. "Cassandra, darling, you made it," she said, her eyes flicking to my dress, elegant but intentionally not corporate. "Come in, everyone's already in the living room. Your father's just opened a bottle of Macallan 25. Expensive scotch. Odd timing considering Monroe's recent financial stress." When I entered the living room, the reason for the celebratory mood became clear. My father stood confidently by the fireplace, a tumbler in hand, the old authority back in his stance. Jackson was lounging nearby, sipping with a smug half-smile. "There she is," my father said with mock cheer. The tech entrepreneur herself. "Happy Thanksgiving, Cassandra." "Happy Thanksgiving," I replied, accepting a glass of wine from Isabel. "You all seem unusually cheerful." "We've had some positive news," my father said vaguely. "But don't worry, we'll spare you the business talk tonight." Jackson couldn't help himself. "Let's just say Monroe's future is secure. A private acquisition went through new capital, no management shakeup. Dad and I are still running the show." I raised my glass slowly, masking my surprise. "They didn't know." "Not yet. Horizon Ventures," my father continued. "Some holding company. They want to remain anonymous, at least for now." Across the room, Richard Palmer met my gaze. He knew, and with a subtle nod, he confirmed what I already felt rising inside me. Tonight, the truth would change everything. "Congratulations," I said smoothly, lifting my glass. "I'm glad things worked out." "Yes, well," Jackson replied, tone sharp. "Some of us know how to handle business challenges without jumping ship." I didn't bite. The dinner bell chimed from the hallway, saving me from having to respond. We filed into the formal dining room and took our usual seats around the massive mahogany table that had hosted generations of Monroe Thanksgivings. The spread was impeccable. As always, my mother's way of ensuring the illusion of perfection, no matter what was crumbling beneath the surface. During the salad course, the conversation stayed light. Isabel beamed over her kids' school awards. My mother gossiped about a neighbor's third divorce. My father offered dry commentary about the unseasonably warm weather. I felt my phone buzzing in my pocket, likely updates from Daniel and our legal team, but I left it untouched. The moment wasn't right. Not yet. As the main course arrived, my father rose glass in hand. "A toast," he said grandly, "to Monroe Industries entering a new era while holding fast to our legacy of leadership." The irony was almost unbearable, but I clinked my glass with the others. "And how's your little company doing, Cassandra?" he asked afterward, his tone unexpectedly neutral. "Virion's doing very well," I said evenly. "We've recently undergone a major expansion." "Oh," my mother asked politely. "New clients." You could say that I replied. We've acquired some substantial new assets. My father nodded absently, uninterested. Good for you. It's nice you found your niche. He smirked at my minimalist dress. Still working from home? Sometimes, I said, reaching for my phone. Actually, I got an important update earlier. I should probably check it. I waited until the moment felt right, not out of spite, but to ensure they heard me without interruption. I glanced at the screen pretending to read a fresh message, rather than the notification I had memorized hours ago. I looked up directly into my father's eyes. It appears the acquisition of Monroe Industries has been completed. Jackson, lounging nearby with a smug smile, jumped in before I could say more. We signed the paperwork this morning. We know. What you don't know, I said calmly, is that Horizon Ventures is a holding company created by Virion Systems specifically for this acquisition. Even Isabel's husband, Mark, still checking financials for Crestline Capital, looked up sharply. Silence dropped like a curtain. My father's fork hovered midair. Jackson's brow furrowed his expression, shifting from smugness to shock. Across the table, Richard Palmer watched with quiet satisfaction. I had just changed the course of our family's legacy with one sentence. My mother's hand rose instinctively to her pearl necklace, a nervous habit I'd seen since childhood. What are you talking about? My father finally asked, his voice sharp. I'm talking about the fact that as of 11:47 this morning, Virion Systems, my company, owns Monroe Industries fully and legally. The explosion I anticipated didn't come immediately. Instead, my father set his utensils down with excruciating care. His face was unreadable. This is a joke, Jackson snapped. A sick joke. It's not a joke, Richard Palmer said, speaking for the first time that evening. I've known about the structure of the acquisition from the beginning. The board approved the sale unanimously, Douglas. Horizon Ventures made the strongest offer, not just financially, but with firm commitments to protect Monroe's workforce and operations. You knew. My father turned to Richard, his voice low and tight with disbelief. You knew my daughter was behind this and said nothing. I knew Virion Systems was the buyer, Richard clarified calmly. And yes, I supported the acquisition because it's exactly what Monroe Industries needs. Cassandra's technology is what will keep this company alive. My father's composure finally cracked. This is outrageous. A hostile takeover by my own daughter. I won't stand for it. It's not a hostile takeover, I replied, voice level. It's a completed acquisition approved by your board, facilitated by Hamilton M&A, and signed by you this morning. Monroe Industries is now a wholly owned subsidiary of Virion Systems. I'll fight this, Jackson growled, red creeping up his neck. We'll sue. This is fraud. There's no fraud, Richard said flatly. The board had full disclosure of the deal. The fact that you didn't investigate Horizon Ventures more carefully isn't a legal defense. It's negligence. My mother, silent, until now finally spoke, her voice quieter than I expected. Cassandra. Why? Why deceive us like this? I met her eyes. Would you have taken a meeting if I had approached you directly? Would you have even considered my proposal objectively? My father's silence was all the answer I needed. I did this because Monroe Industries is failing under your leadership, I continued. Not due to incompetence, but because you've refused to evolve. You dismissed sustainability, ignored innovation, and clung to legacy methods while the world moved on. And you think you can do better, my father spat. You've never set foot on a factory floor. That's exactly why I can do better, I answered, voice steady. Because I've spent my career building the future you refuse to see. Because I'm not bound by tradition, I said steadily. I understand both worlds, legacy manufacturing and the innovation that's reshaping it. Virion Systems has already proven these approaches can work together. We've helped dozens of companies modernize and grow. There's no reason Monroe Industries can't be one of them. So this is revenge, Jackson muttered bitterly. Because we didn't bow down to your so-called vision? This isn't about revenge, I replied. Was it revenge? Maybe a part of it. But more than that, it was vision. Mine finally stepping into the light. I'd spent years asking to be seen. Now I was illuminating the very future they refused to imagine. though deep down I couldn't deny that vindication was part of it. But it wasn't the point. It's about saving Monroe Industries from collapse. Without this acquisition, you were months away from bankruptcy or worse, being gutted by a private equity firm. I'm offering a way forward, one that protects jobs, honors our family's legacy, and brings the company into the 21st century. Isabel, quiet, until now, finally spoke. What happens next? To the company? To us? It was the first grounded question of the evening, and I welcomed it. Operations will continue, I explained, but with Virion systems integrated across the board. We'll modernize the facilities, implement sustainable practices, and shift from survival mode to long-term growth. I looked at my father and brother. As for your roles, that depends on you. I'm not here to fire anyone or shut anyone out. I'm offering a partnership, your knowledge of production, paired with the innovation we've developed at Virion. But it must be a true partnership, not the old hierarchy we've lived under. My father stood sharply, the legs of his chair scraping across the polished wood. I will not be patronized in my own home. You may have orchestrated this acquisition, but don't think for a second I'll work for you. Not for me, I said softly. With me. There's a difference. He held my gaze for several seconds, decades of emotion and tension flashing in his eyes. Then he turned and walked out without another word. Jackson followed close behind, pausing only to sneer. You'll regret this before storming after our father. My mother hovered, torn between family loyalty and disbelief. Cassandra, how could you do this to us? I did it for us, I said. For Grandpa Howard's legacy. For the employees who depend on Monroe Industries. Sometimes saving something means doing what others won't. She shook her head and left quietly. Only Isabel, her husband, and Richard remained at the table. After a long silence, Isabel said, For what it's worth, I think you're right. Dad and Jackson would never admit it, but things have been worse than they've let on. I know, I said gently. That's why I did it. Richard raised his glass toward me. To the future. To the future of Monroe Virion. Richard Palmer said, raising his glass. May it become something stronger than either could have been alone. I lifted my glass in return, feeling the weight of what I had set into motion. Opportunities created, bridges singed. Whatever challenges came next. For the first time, it felt like my family's legacy and my personal journey were finally headed in the same direction. The weeks following Thanksgiving were anything but quiet. My father refused to return my calls. Jackson hired an attorney to explore legal options, though Richard reassured me there was no valid path to challenge the acquisition. My mother acted as an unwilling intermediary, her voice tight in every strained conversation. Meanwhile, the real work began. Virion's acquisition of Monroe Industries sent ripples through the manufacturing sector. Our stock jumped overnight as analysts hailed the strategic brilliance of pairing Monroe's long-established manufacturing base with Virion's cutting-edge tech. Inside Monroe, Industries' nerves were high, but not hostile. The fear of mass layoffs gave way to cautious hope as I met with employees in person and presented our integration plan. Monroe Industries has a legacy worth honoring, I told the assembled staff in the Charleston headquarters. But a proud past isn't enough. We're here to evolve that legacy, not erase it. Together, we'll build something stronger. We began with the Detroit facility, formerly Monroe's biggest liability. Within 3 months of implementing Virion's resource management software and retrofitting key machinery, output rose by 40%. Energy usage dropped by 35%. Even the most skeptical foreman started to believe in the new vision. Eventually, my father agreed to meet in a private room at the Charleston City Club, where generations of Monroes had once struck business deals and forged alliances. He looked older than I remembered. The months had etched lines around his eyes and mouth, the kind formed from clenching pride. You've put me in an impossible position, he said without greeting. If I fight you, I destroy the company I built. But if I don't, I lose control. I'm not asking you to surrender, I replied. I'm offering you a role, one that honors everything you've done and uses your experience where it matters. He raised an eyebrow, as what some figurehead, chairman emeritus. No, I said gently. As Chief Legacy Officer, you'll manage core relationships, pass on institutional knowledge, and help ensure we modernize without losing the values that made Monroe Industries matter in the first place. He didn't speak right away, just stared at me, skepticism flickering behind his eyes. And you'd have real authority, I clarified. Clearly defined responsibilities, not ceremonial, but not unilateral control either. You'd have input on strategic decisions, especially regarding long-standing clients and operational partners. My father swirled the amber liquid in his glass eyes, fixed on the wall, thinking. And Jackson. That was more delicate. His resistance had been louder, more volatile, his threats more direct. He hadn't just questioned the deal. He had tried to dismantle it. Jackson needs to decide whether he can adapt, I said. If he can, there's space for him overseeing traditional manufacturing where his experience matters. If not, I let the sentence drift off. My father nodded slowly. He's always been more rigid than I am, more convinced of his own rightness. Then he looked at me, something shifting in his expression, like looking in a mirror sometimes. It was the closest thing to self-awareness I'd ever seen from him. Will you consider the offer, I asked. I'll think about it, he said. And from Douglas Monroe, that was practically a yes. Jackson's decision took longer. After exhausting every legal avenue and discovering the acquisition was airtight, he disappeared to his lake house outside Asheville for 2 weeks. When he returned, he asked for a formal meeting at Monroe Industries headquarters. I braced for a confrontation. Instead, he showed up with a detailed presentation outlining a hybrid manufacturing strategy combining Virion's tech with Monroe's operational backbone. I still think the way you did this was wrong, he said bluntly. But I've spent my life preparing to lead this company. I'm not walking away because the framework changed. To my surprise, the proposal was solid, thoughtful, strategic. We negotiated a role, Chief Manufacturing Officer, reporting to Daniel as Virion's overall COO, but with independent authority over production facilities. Even Isabel surprised me. She asked to lead the new Sustainability Communications Department using her nonprofit background and social network to build trust with more conservative clients. My mother found her rhythm to hosting quarterly events that bridged the culture gap between longtime Monroe executives and the younger innovation-focused Virion hires. The transformation wasn't seamless. There were arguments over deadlines, resistance from middle management, and sabotage attempts by those afraid of losing power. But the numbers didn't lie. By the end of the first year, profitability had risen 28%. Sustainability metrics improved across the board. But for me, the most meaningful progress wasn't on paper. It was watching a programmer from Virion troubleshoot equipment alongside a Monroe line supervisor. It was seeing collaboration, not rivalry, take root in the company that had once cast me out. Factory floor workers who once resisted automation were now embracing technology that made their jobs safer, more efficient, and more fulfilling. Watching seasoned technicians partner with young engineers to implement upgrades was a vision I'd hoped for, but hadn't expected to see unfold so quickly. Yet the most unexpected transformation came in my relationship with my father. Our weekly strategy meetings, once stiff and transactional, slowly shifted into something more collaborative. While the tension didn't vanish overnight, we began to meet each other in the middle, he acknowledging the strategic merit of my innovations, I gaining deeper appreciation for the decades of wisdom embedded in his operational instincts. 6 months after the acquisition, he dropped by my office unannounced. It used to be his office, the top-floor corner suite at Monroe Industries' Charleston headquarters. But I'd stripped it of its heavy wood panels and dark leather furniture, replacing them with natural light glass partitions and a corner innovation lab filled with scaled-down prototypes for factory floor redesigns. He looked around quietly, hands in his pockets. I wouldn't have done it this way, he said at last. I know, I replied cautiously, bracing for critique. But he surprised me. It works. For what you're building, he said. Different times, different methods. Coming from Douglas Monroe, it was nothing short of a standing ovation. Later that same week, we both attended an industry leadership conference in Atlanta. While walking past a lounge, I overheard him speaking with Anthony Blake, a former competitor who had once called me dangerous. My daughter sees things differently than I ever did, my father said. Took me too long to realize different didn't mean wrong. He chuckled softly. She's building something I never could have imagined. Maybe that's exactly what Monroe Industries needed. Anthony glanced over and caught my eye, offering a knowing smile. The student becomes the teacher. My father turned his expression softer than I'd seen in years. More like old and new, learning to move forward together. That night, I sat by my apartment window, overlooking the Charles River, reflecting on everything that had unfolded. I had gone from family outcast to steward of the Monroe legacy. Yes, there had been satisfaction in proving them wrong. But the deeper fulfillment came from building something that honored both history and progress, something built to last beyond any single name, including mine. My grandfather had founded Monroe Industries to manufacture goods that made life better. By weaving in innovation and sustainability, we were continuing that mission for a new era. As for my family, we were still figuring it out. Some wounds had healed, others remained. But for the first time, there was respect, and with that, the possibility of real reconciliation. Not perfection, not resolution, but progress. And in both family and business, I've learned true transformation doesn't come from conquest. It comes from connection. From legacy meeting innovation, from tradition and progress, finding the courage to grow together. If you've ever been dismissed, underestimated, or told your vision didn't belong, then you already understand my journey. And if something in my story resonated with you, I hope you'll share your thoughts in the comments below. I read them all. And I'd love to hear, have you ever had to fight to prove your worth? Did your success ever challenge the very people you once sought approval from? Your voice matters. So don't just scroll past, drop a comment. Let's talk about how we build something new without burning down where we came from. Because here's what I've learned, and maybe it'll help you too. It's not about erasing the past. It's about evolving it. There's strength in tradition, but only if it can adapt to change. I spent years thinking I had to choose between honoring my family or following my own path. But it turns out I didn't have to choose. I just had to build a path no one else saw. Whatever industry you're in, whatever family you're part of, don't let outdated thinking define your limits. Innovate with empathy. Lead with integrity. And when you're told you're too young, too different, too disruptive, take a breath, then get to work. Your future isn't something you're handed. It's something you design. And if this story moved you, if you've been where I've been, subscribed to the channel, you won't just be following more stories like mine. You'll be standing with all of us who were once told you can't and decided to answer. Watch me. This isn't just my story. It might be yours too. So tell me, what are you building?